Today I'm joined by Paul Smith, who's on a mission to transform how the world's companies are run. While terms like corporate governance might put you to sleep, the reality is that what happens in boardrooms shapes almost every aspect of our lives, from the price of your groceries to the future of our planet. As the founder of Future Directors, Paul is challenging a system where a small group of typically older, typically wealthy people make decisions that affect us all. He's become known for saying what many won't, that decades of experience and prestigious qualifications might actually be getting in the way of good decision making at the top of major companies and organisations. What makes Paul particularly interesting isn't just that he's willing to challenge power structures, it's that he's proving there's a better way. Through Future Directors, he's helping transform how companies are run by combining technology with insights into human behaviour. He's even helped place directors as young as 21 in boardrooms, shattering the myth that you need grey hair to help shape our future. Paul, welcome to Chasing Financial Equality.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
You speak a lot about your drive to make governance more accessible, coming from personal experience and with feeling gaslit and constrained. Can you tell us about that journey? Did it start when you were a kid or did it develop later in life?
I definitely got my sense of social justice from my early years, from being gaslit. And I think the biggest thing for me, and I sort of knew this was going to come up, was I really hate it when anybody's misunderstood, misinterpreted. Context is king for me. I remember growing up, people would put words in my mouth and misunderstand on purpose, wouldn't even try. And there's a sense of fairness that comes from that for me, of wanting everybody to be understood. Worst thing you can do around me often is finish somebody's sentence for them, speak over someone. One of my son's grandparents likes to speak on his behalf. Like, kid's very articulate and 11 years old, he can talk for himself. So there's a large sense of my sense of social justice came from those things, but I don't think I really understood it until I started reflecting on it later in life. At the time, it was just annoying. And then it became something more than that. Only really, sort of similar to you, left school, left university, went to the City of London. It was all about money and continuing the lifestyle, but it felt out of place. And I think it only really married up when I moved to Australia when I turned 30. And I started getting access to a lot of personal development stuff and the business stuff and getting it more exposure. And then everything became reflection on all those things.
Okay. Can you tell us about Future Directors and what you're doing there?
Yeah. Let me start with the current and work backwards. So Future Directors now is essentially reinventing itself as a tech startup for boards. So we've gone from our audience and customer being the individual to our audience and customer really being the collective. So we have just acquired a UK-based board management software company. We are taking the IP I've developed for board evaluations, that's like performance reviews, where the group answer a whole bunch of different questions and you analyze the data. We're codifying that into the technology. And then we've got our pre-existing community platform, which has got on-demand short courses. So we're trying to create this end-to-end governance platform, which will elevate a board's decision-making abilities. So there's the efficiency, there's the insights, and there's the education and community. And we're making it hugely accessible from a price point and a user experience. That's really been a very relatively new change. It was always the plan for me to find a way to scale, but we started out 10 years ago this year. So in April 2025, depending on when people are watching and listening this, we become 10 years old. We started out helping individuals into the boardroom, helping them develop strategies, their value proposition, focused on young, and then more diverse, and then what we called outsiders. So my book was about outsiders. And then we brought in corporate speaking and workshops and consulting and everything in there. But the plan was always find a way to scale and elevate everybody. So that's what Future Directors is supposed to be doing now, is we're now working with boards anywhere in the world who can't usually get access to the sort of tools they need, because you can either send one person on an expensive course, or you can bring one consultant in this year, or you can maybe afford a bit of that expensive technology. We're trying to give them all for such a good price, because that's what technology allows us to do, that they can then take the rest of their budget and do deeper dives with consultants or whatever else they need to do.
It's been a while since I've been on a board, but those that I have been on, and I probably was about 10 years ago, was a very analog experience.
Yes.
We live in a SaaS time where every company is buying software as a service, and that has led to more data, more tracking, more performance reviews. Are boards lagging behind the companies they are responsible for overseeing?
Absolutely. I don't even have to embellish that. Absolutely. They are the laggards of the tech world. So if you think about board management software, the top end of town, so the ones with the resources, public companies, they're pretty saturated with companies like Diligent. They're the biggest in the world. Then you get into private businesses, not-for-profits, institutions, associations. The cut-through of board technology in any sense, beyond, and I mean specialized one, not just Google Docs or something like that, is, I'm going to say, roughly high single figures to low sort of teens. So a cut through.
So we're talking a lot of boards still operating via group emails and Google
PDFs.
Docs.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're using technology, but they're not using board-specific technology. And usually it's because the majority of boards and majority organizations out there are volunteer, not-for-profit, whatever. So they don't have budgets assigned to them for that, and they don't see the value in it. That's changing. So I do a lot of work in the AI governance space. And when I say that, I'm more focused on the use of AI in the boardroom to elevate decision making, as opposed to how you govern for AI within your organization or community, etc. There's a lot of noise and stuff going on over there, and it's no different to governing anything else. It's just more transformative. That is like even more minuscule in terms of adoption. And a lot of the usage is coming through the board technology companies like us, because they're bringing AI into those things. So you've got an audience that's already there. In my talking to a lot of people who use those big end of town board tech companies, they use 10% of the features. Because they don't have the time, they don't have the training, they don't have the inclination, because most of these boards are not full time. So how do you bring something to them where they want to? But again, I don't want to stereotype age-wise, but boards are not, most boards, the average age of most boards around the world are between late 50s and early 60s. And I know that people who are of that age group, in either side of that age group, have mobile phones, they use technology, but they didn't grow up with it. So the adoption is really slow. That's not to say that younger board members are that better either. It's really come down to the collective need to why we do it, why we need technology to make our collective decision-making unit, which is what they are, more effective, more efficient.
I think that appetite for discovering how new technologies can leverage what you're doing obviously wanes as you get older, further away from the new technologies. But I mean, even, I think about my parents who are in their 60s and they have no interest in learning about new technology. That said, I'm now 36 and I'm not as interested in new technology as I used to be. And so I can sort of see how board members are not going to be looking for opportunities to leverage what they're doing with technology.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find that I've had the same conversation with someone who's in their 70s who, and again, this is a sample of one, but I've had this conversation a few times off the back of that saying, I can't change. Especially when it comes to technology, and yet they have a mobile phone which they use and daily. Now so mobile phones are technology. There's technology within that mobile phone, apps, that sort of thing. So it happens. I think it's a case of they're not doing it purposefully with intention. It's just like they're just keeping up as much as they can because that's what everybody else says. Now, that one person did have a landline still, which is phenomenal, but they still used a mobile phone. Not for everything they could do, but they were just starting to use banking apps because their local bank had closed down. So it is possible. It's more a case of intentionality, I think.
Yeah, for sure. You've written about how qualifications like the Australian Institute of Company Director courses aren't indicators of competence.
Yeah.
What's missing from traditional governance education?
The biggest thing is accessibility. Most governance courses around the world, and the AICD is no different than most of them. The AICD was actually born from the Institute of Directors in the UK, like a lot of them were in Commonwealth countries. Most of their courses are out of reach for most people. So, it costs upward of $10,000 to go and do this course. There's continuous professional development. How are we supposed to educate boards when what's really traditionally been available has been out of reach? Like going back to that budget, individual budgets, collective organizational budgets. It's not there. So accessibility is one thing. There's a little bit of modernization going on, but they do keep them up to date as much as they possibly can, but the world's changing so quickly. So the biggest thing is accessibility from a supply perspective. Most of the problem is from the demand side. So the issue is not just the governance industry and the provider of these things, because they're starting to digitize and provide things, but there's not a lot of structure. A lot of it comes from the demand side. It's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. Why do I need to educate myself? And because there's still this myth that you join a board as a whole and complete individual to give back your knowledge and experience and skills. If only the world wasn't moving on at a rapid pace, you could probably do that. You think about the traditional way boards are recruited. You finish your exec career, you become a non-exec, and you go and join boards. You retire from this big company or being a C-suite, whatever, and you become a board director on multiple boards. You have a portfolio, have some paid ones, have some unpaid ones, and that starts in your 50s and 60s. Yep. And so why would I need to go and learn new things? I've learned everything. I'm now here to give back. And that's that myth. So the demand side of education is, I don't need to educate.
Do you think that might be where the fear exists in boardrooms of the words, I don't know, comes from?
Yeah.
No one wants to say, I don't know.
Now, I'm making very blanket things here from a majority perspective, but there's obviously lots of people out there learning and striving, and they're doing it in their own way, and they're doing it formally, informally, and they're curious, because that's the number one trait of any great board director is curiosity of self, of each other, of the decisions we're making, of the industry we're in. So yeah, there is the fear of I don't know, and that comes in lots of different forms, because you're supposed to know.
That's why you're there.
You're there because you're supposed to have the answers.
You're bringing the answers.
You're bringing the answers, right? And then you've also got the regulatory pressure in lots of jurisdictions, because if we get this wrong, we're done for.
Yeah.
Like, not from a jail perspective, that's different, but like our reputation, for potentially financial losses, the organization, the company, if we get this wrong. But there's no ability to get a decision right and know it's going to be right anymore, and I think it probably never was. The only thing you can do, we're going to fire half our staff. Yes, that will reduce your costs, but you don't know what the knock-on effect of all of that's going to be to your brand and your business and everybody else you stays.
We spoke about accessibility to the AICD courses. It almost appears, if you were to glance on the wonderful platform that is LinkedIn, everyone's adding GA ICD to their bio or their name. So they've got a lot of people out there spending $10,000 on this course or having it sponsored by whoever they're working for.
Yeah.
Are they coming out, or are they at least coming out of that course knowing what a director should do?
Yeah. Like if they've paid attention and they've got their letters, they've had to pass these exams and they have to submit stuff. So it's a pretty comprehensive thing. It's not just turn up for 5 days. A lot of people don't even complete, so they don't get letters as well. You do get a lot from it. And I've been involved in other courses around the world, like advanced courses as a facilitator, help build courses as well. So there's a lot that goes on. So for your money, it's more a case of, do they truly have the mindset though? It's all well and good getting a qualification, which is knowledge and examples and case studies, but that translation from knowledge to application inside the boardroom, it all comes from that mindset side of things, which is where the linkage between a piece of paper, letters after your name, and actual competency. Like if you took two people who had the right mindset and the same skills experience, one had the letters and one didn't, of course this one should be better. But if this one doesn't have the right mindset, doesn't have the right curiosity, the intentionality, they've done it and they've forgotten it, and it's all become the binder goes away and you forget it.
It's a bit of a box ticking process for some.
I always ask the question, who would you prefer to have on your board as well? A young 30-something who's created and sold 6 businesses and is like full of great ideas and wants to change the world, or someone who's been at PwC or one of the big 4 for 40 years and has just retired? And I always find the answer fascinating. It's the same sort of thing. Some people go that one, some people that one, some people go both, and I go, it depends.
My favorite question of people who think the finance industry isn't broken is to ask, what's the point of insurance? And it stumps them firstly most of the time. And I say, what's the point of insurance? Is it to make profit, or is it to protect people against things they couldn't afford otherwise? And it's really interesting, the answers. And it can be one or the other. It can be both. And then if it is both, I say, well, how can you do that effectively? When if you want to make a profit, you can make more by protecting people less.
Yes.
And that generally stumps people. So I think, that question of which one do you want is a good tool to get people thinking about, well, we need a little bit of both in these contexts.
Yeah, I would love to see, I think in an ideal world, everybody entering the boardroom would have a standard level of competency which could be tested. The problem is the role of a board member in any type of organization, private, not-for-profit, public company, listed, whatever, is so complicated. To even do a basic intelligence test or a basic test would be really hard. And also to send them on a course is going to be hugely expensive for any organization. So I don't actually know what the answer is, apart from people entering the boardroom, having the mindset, I've got to understand why I'm here and what I'm supposed to be doing. There's plenty of content out there. There's plenty of things, whether you pay for it or it's free, that could give you enough knowledge. You're going in with your eyes wide open, and then you're just relying on your skills, your aptitude, your capabilities. That doesn't happen as much as it should. And that's what frustrates me about the boardroom more than anything else, is there's people in there who don't really understand why they're there and what they're doing. But that's the same in any walk of life.
I recently interviewed Nikki Tagano, who is the founder of Scene Culture, and she is all about helping businesses see the potential in their staff that isn't traditionally measured or isn't measured in a traditional way. And one of the things she talks about is actually a basketball concept called the player efficiency rating. And I am not a sporting guy, right? But I love this notion of a player efficiency rating, because it enables us to look at corporate culture and many parts of society, actually, and overlay a sports lens to it, which everyone can grasp. And, I've done it for the DEI policies, for example. And you think about DEI policies, often one of the criticisms is that they are a quota system. My rebuttal to that is, well, every football team, every basketball team has a quota system. You can't have all offensive players. You've got to have defensive players, or if you don't, you're going to have a shit team. You've got to have centers. You've got to have people who are moving around the ball. You've got to have a mixture, and you've got to fill those roles appropriately based on the requirements of the role. Maybe there's an opportunity to do some kind of aptitude testing where you look at, on your board, you need to have certain people that are strong in different areas and bring diversity to the board, whatever that looks like.
Great boards do that. So don't get me wrong, there are great boards out there. The great boards have this. They have this thing called a skills matrix. It goes by many names, but the skills matrix is a thing. And the skills are not just technical skills, they're human skills as well, and like values and behaviors. And they self-regulate on that, and they use it as a gap analysis, as a training development thing as well, for people to understand what they need and why they need it. And diversity can be on there as well as a measure of the matrix of the board. And so what they're trying to do is get this team together, because again, the board is just another team, which has all the right skills, experience and knowledge and connections and everything, and aptitude and capabilities and diversity, so they can do what they're supposed to do, which is essentially make decisions about the future.
Perform well as a team.
Yeah, they are team performance, where this is what they're being hired for, and all the senses around it, rather than their physical prowess as well. Although obviously in a sporting team, most of it's up here anyway.
We've got quite a few listeners who are in the corporate space. You said there are good boards out there doing things like this. Any sort of larger companies come to mind?
No.
So they're traditionally smaller companies? Are they traditionally not-for-profits? Or?
Look, there's no data. Okay. This is the problem. There's no data, so all I have is anecdotal.
Okay.
And I'm exposed to a lot of organizations, a lot of boards. So you see the good, bad, and the ugly. But I'm also exposed to a whole bunch of people who do similar things to I do, and I hear their stories. There's no, I couldn't say that company is doing great. The analogy I have is, a great board is like a great referee or umpire. You don't hear about them if they're doing a great job.
Yep.
If they're doing a bad job, they're everywhere. And obviously, we're not built as a society to go to do media reporting on, that board made a great decision today, because it just happens behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But if, we're having a royal commission,
you hear about the board.
You hear about the board and everybody on the board and all the things they didn't do right, whether they were culpable for that or just willfully ignorant of what's going on. And a lot of the Royal Commission stuff was more, ignorance, willful ignorance, specific things, and then like a lack of information. And I had a lot of sympathy for people who went through that.
Sounds like a lot of that could be solved with better use of technology around circulating information, making sure that people are on top of what they need to be on top of, and manage that cycle.
Potentially, yes. The problem we have right now in the board world, amongst all the other problems that are happening, it's getting harder and harder. And we're not giving more time and more money to people. You think about 90% of board members in this country are voluntary.
Yep.
They sit on one board, maybe two. And you expect them to keep up. Technology is a great way to do it. But they have to rely on people feeding them stuff. And I don't want to launch into another rabbit hole. I think this is the big issue here. If you think, okay, I'm going to weave around a bit, so hold me up if I go on different places, but I might lose my train of thought.
I'll just edit it out later, it's fine.
Let's take Australia. 25 million people. In this country, there are a few thousand listed companies. There are more private companies of a larger size. There are 1.5 million small businesses. There are a couple 100,000 not-for-profits and charities within that. There are 15,000 plus schools. There are community groups. And then you add all the committees that happen around those organizations as well. It's based on my rudimentary maths. There's about 500,000 board directors in this country. Our working population is about 11 million. And most of those board directors, again, this is not a stereotypical thing, it's just the way it is, are white collar. So about 1 in 10 to 12 of the adult population sits on a board in this country because we have so many incorporated entities and it's so easy to set up. That is in itself a dangerous thing. So you've got 500,000 people who need to understand what their job is, need to be constantly upskilling because the world is changing. They haven't even caught up with cybersecurity and now AI has been put on them. Fundraising's changing for everybody. So this is the biggest problem we have is we have way too many organizations, way too many board directors and not enough stuff to give them. Plus 90% of them are unpaid. So, and they only do one board role and they might only be on there for 3 to 6 years and they might never do it again. Scoreboard, for example, is a perfect example. There's no incentive. So there's a system. You and I both love systemic issues. This is a systemic problem. And yet, like your intro at the beginning, if we get the boardroom right, a lot of knock-on effects come from that. So there's an education problem, there's a mindset problem, there's a problem around how many we have and who's in there and how they're getting in there and all that sort of side of things. So many problems. But there are wonderful boards out there because there's wonderful people out there. And right now, boards are just a group of human beings. So you put a good one together, well led by the chair, you get a really high functioning board. Doesn't mean you have a high functioning board means a high functioning company though. You can have a great board that's doing all the right things, having all the right conversations, and the company can still fail. I did go around the houses there, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to ask you a question about a question. If I ask you what are the 4 villains of decision making, how long's the answer?
How long's the answer?
Yeah.
Well, if I use Chip and Dan Heath's ones, I can do them pretty quickly.
What are the 4 villains of decision making?
Okay, so short-termism. So always thinking about the instant rather than long-term. I got to remember these, even though I've presented on them so many times. Actually, can we pause?
Yeah, of course.
I know you're editing this, so
that's all right.
This one for a while.
4 villains.
Oh my God, mind blank. You've got them there, have you?
I'm about to. Once this connects to my phone, free to connect.
It's going to really piss me off that I don't have these in my head.
Yeah, you do it.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Oh, now it's connected, of course.
Here we go. Of course. Thank goodness. Yeah, all right. Just shows you when you move on to new topic.
What are the 4 villains of decision making?
Okay, so first one's narrow framing, and that essentially means your focal point is too narrow and you're missing out on information. The next one is confirmation bias, so you only seek out information which confirms a pre-existing view, and there's a whole bunch of different things within the bias framework, which is really interesting. Short-term emotion, that's not saying that emotional decision-making is wrong, it's talking more you're reacting and you're not really sitting back and reflecting on that reaction.
Yep.
So it could be an emotional, angry response to something that happens. So your decision making can be completely affected if you are triggered and your response is your decision and it's short-term and emotional. And then overconfidence in the future. So you're making predictions about your business model and you're like, yeah, our sales will go this way or this will go this way. So overconfidence in the future. And I think that's reflective of this VUCA world we live in now, this volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, is that we are overconfident in decisions we make. And so all of those apply to the boardroom.
Cool. You've observed that humans are far more competent than we give them credit for, but systems constrain that competency. Can you explain why and how we might fix it?
Well, if you have a conversation, let's talk, have a conversation with an individual about anything. You can have a relatively smart conversation, maybe not politics sometimes, but you put people into a collective with systems around them, and all this nuance and all this ability to think just seems to disappear. I just think what prompted this? So there was a story behind this one. I used to have the mindset of out with the old, in with the new when it came to the boardroom. Like, let's just get rid of all these old farts who are not doing anything for their stakeholders, the wider world, whatever it happened to be. Like, my view is the boardroom's client, or who they serve, is the company as a whole, all of its stakeholders, not just shareholders or the staff. It's everyone, the broader community, the environment. But then I realized when I started working more and more with existing board members, there was so much potential there. They just needed someone to give them access. It's like saying prisoners can't be rehabilitated, or anybody who's never done any personal development work is completely wasted until they start. You just need to give access to it, which triggers a mindset shift. So one of my best friends who's also in this space is a guy called Matt Fulbrook, lives in Canada. One of the first things we agreed on when we first met each other was, what's the biggest single change that needs to happen within the boardroom? And it was mine. So for me, I think that there's so much competency out there. There's so many great people out there who just aren't fulfilling that potential because they haven't really been shown either a different way, or they haven't been given access to it, hasn't been made safe for them, whatever it happens to be. Yes, there's also a whole bunch of narcissistic sociopaths out there as well.
You've talked about boards needing to focus on long-term impact. How do we overcome the pressure for short-term results in a board context?
Such a tricky question. I think if I had the answer to this one, I'd be richer than Elon Musk. Who wants that though? Not me. It's another systemic issue. So if we take listed companies, for example, I don't know, the main story is that companies before the 80s were quite long term, and then brokers came along and gave everybody a reason to buy and sell as quickly as possible because that's how they made their money. So here's new information I'm giving you, quickly buy more, sell more, and everything then became the quick turnaround. And then CEOs and boards have focused on the share price rather than the long term, because the share price dictated a whole bunch of different things, even though it didn't really dictate long-term profitability or sustainability. Number about what the share is worth in the market, but their incentives are tied to this number. So I think we have a system of misaligned incentives. Personally, we're not incentivized, especially at that level, to think about the real long-term. We're incentivized to focus on the short-term results, and that means that's why so many big companies lay off tons of people just to fix a number. It's just to fix a number in my mind. They might say something different long-term, but why do they all hire them back 6 months later and spend a fortune doing it? Because it's an accounting fix. It's an accounting fix to fix one number, which is the share price. Now, take out listed companies, not-for-profits the same, because they've got donors and funders who need to see some sort of short-term result. It might not be financial, it would be impact numbers, but these things take such a long time. So there's this system of incentives that directs people away from the short term, and boards can get sucked into that because they meet periodically and they want to know what the latest financials are. And again, when you have boards made up of accountants and lawyers and people like who they're already, especially if they're in those spaces, they're also thinking short term. I don't know where this data comes from, but I remember who told me, and it might be one of my people you spoke to beforehand. I think it might have been Anna Byrne. She said there is information out there that says only less than 5% of the world could be considered visionaries, can actually imagine a different future. So you imagine a board, typical board, 6 to 8 people. You might have no visionaries on that board. You have no people who can actually think of a different future long term. So how can we expect that? So there's systemic problems, and then you've got that individual element too, and it's always that combination.
Maybe if Kodak's board had a visionary, they might have had a different fate.
Well, the thing with Kodak board was they had a very profitable business, and whilst everything came along, the digital side of things, it wasn't profitable, so they didn't focus on it, and then they weren't used to the pace of change. So hindsight's 20/20, right? In the real sense, they didn't do anything wrong because all their profit was coming from their analog. So why would they change that? They just didn't see what was coming. But there's been so many businesses that way. They don't see what's coming. And I would always say, well, what would you do in that situation? Things coming, and it may impact your entire business. But right now, your entire business is hugely profitable and has been for decades. Would you change? I think 99% of board members now and back then would have done exactly the same what Kodak did. And maybe there was a few people going, digital is going to change everything. And they wouldn't have been listened to.
It's interesting because if you look at a business, it's a set of assets, income producing assets, really. If you have a look at the general understanding of how to build a good stock portfolio for any investor, most people will tell you, depending on where you're at in life, and this is not financial advice, to allocate 5% to high risk assets or investments. Maybe the approach to that is to say, well, we've got to allocate 5% of our business to the maybes.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it our business, I call it the fun budget, right? You know, as an ideas person, you've always got to be looking things. Like, the danger for me is that the fun budget is all of my time, because I'm like a magpie with shiny new objects. I think if we take the Kodak example and AI right now, AI is the next phase, right? We've gone from commoditizing things and we've gone through a digital age. Now we're going through an information age, and AI will change everything. And companies who are ignoring AI in that sense are going to end up being the new Kodaks. And again, that means you have to invite people into your boardroom, whether inside the room or advising you, that can see differently, like the futurist types. And you also have to look back. Like wisdom's a really interesting word around in my space, in my world, that often wisdom is equated to, you've been around, you must be wise, been doing this for 40 years, you must have so much wisdom. And I can't remember who said it or who says it, but I love it. It's like wisdom's more reflection on experience than actual experience. Because you could do all these things and never reflect on them. You're never going to be wise. So if we look back and go, what were all the mistakes Kodak made? We would have made the same things, but what can we learn from that? That's wisdom. So, and they're one great example of what,
I want to go back to estimates that 5% of the population are capable of looking into the future and being visionaries. One of the things I talk about a lot is self-awareness as a quality or as an attribute of a person. And I think it's one of the most important features a person can have. And it's what I look for in the people that I surround myself with. There's some studies out there that anywhere between 90 and 95% of people believe they're self-aware. But only, on average, 10% of people display evidence of those traits. Quite interestingly, half as many men as women.
Yeah,
women are twice as likely to be self-aware than men.
Don't do that.
Do you think we need to be looking at maybe the psychological makeup of people who sit on boards?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I have a quote, which is my own quote. The boardroom of the future will be simultaneously more human and less human. And the less human is obviously technology and AI especially, and I'm fascinated about how it can help augment and enhance. But the more human is exactly what you're talking about, is that boards as a whole will really look at their own self-knowledge. I call this self-governance. So
it's almost like corporate self-awareness.
Yeah, but at an individual and a collective level. So you've got the board dynamics, how we interact with each other as a group, and going back to the four villains of decision making, the confirmation bias could be, I don't like the way you're dressed, therefore everything you say will be filtered. Or you're politically at the other end of the spectrum to me, therefore everything you say will be filtered. Or you're a woman, therefore everything you say will be filtered. Short-term emotion, you said something that I don't like. And without any of that self-awareness or self-governance, all these villains will come in. And if we do that, so if we individually raise our game, then we can do it collectively as well. And then the ability to make better decisions will only be elevated. So yeah, and I call that just raising the EQ in the room. We just need more emotional intelligence. And that's not just being able to empathize with other people and put something, it's also what you do with yourself and how aware you are. So I'm right there with you. That's the more human bit. And going back to something that we talked about beforehand about the I don't know, vulnerability comes into that as well.
Yeah. Obviously, I have a psych background, so it's probably no surprise to hear that I believe psychology has a bigger role to play in business than commerce degrees or anything of a similar nature.
I think all boards need a coach, for example. I think every individual could use therapy of some sort.
I agree.
Whether you feel like you need it or not, it's just
therapy
being
can be
coached.
different.
Yeah.
Therapy can look different for everyone else.
Therapy,
Yep.
like it's coaching. It's a different form of coaching.
We go to the gym, we get a PT sometimes if we need a little bit of help. PT can be different for everyone. Everyone's got different goals.
So here's the thing, right? So sports teams, high-performing teams, all have coaches and support staff. Boards, you would think they should be one of the highest-performing teams there are, given the decisions they're made.
Lots of high-performing executives have coaches.
Yes, high-performing boards, as a group though, as a team, very few.
Because they're bringing their knowledge. They know more.
I picked up one client as what I call myself as a board coach, where I basically work with the board for 12 months. And I sit with them, not in every meeting, but I sit with them individually, collectively, and I work with them to help them take information that I bring, that we all work, and like embed it, and everybody gets to raise their game individually. I'm at the very beginning of that, but that is just so uncommon. Like some board directors will have coaches in the same way executives will, but if you're there because of how you think, how you interact, shouldn't we be considered a high performance team? And in fact, aren't the decisions that we make in the boardroom far more important than the ones we do in the sports field from a whole of society point of view?
I think going back to the sports analogy, it's just making sure you're fit to play.
Yeah.
And every sporting team has a coach.
Yeah.
No,
and
I think it's a really interesting...
take it to the next level, right? And they bring in a whole bunch of different ways in which they can train the teams to make decisions well when they're under the pump. And it started in the military where life and death decisions. Now it's in sports where for the fans it's life and death decisions. And for you in terms of winning, you're 2-0 down. Tennis players, we've got the Australian Open right now. They've all got sports psychologists if they can afford them.
Absolutely.
Because it's a mental game. Execs, as you say, they've started to become more common. Boardrooms, though, it goes back to the whole thing. You're supposed to be whole and complete. Why would I need help? We already have everything we're supposed to need in order to help govern and make decisions. But they don't.
If I try and relate that back to maybe an ordinary person's experience, someone that, is not a high-flying exec, is not someone who has a heap of money on hand, I sort of bring it back to the notion that many people in their life have a mentor.
Yep.
Someone that helps them. Usually they're older, they know more, they've been around the block a few more times. They're not always sitting on their shoulder, but they're available and they learn from them.
Yep.
And I think about the best mentors I've had in my life have also had their own mentors.
Yep.
And if you look at that in the context of the boardroom, lots of those people would be mentors to people as it is now, but maybe they don't have their own mentors.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, they do have mentors as well. And again, I go back to the high performing ones. Some of the traits I find within the high performing boards is they are all curious. They're always asking the questions, which means they're asking the questions themselves. So they probably have got mentors and people they talk to and coaches. And yeah, the biggest thing with all of this, going back to the education side, is the cost element. Mentors can be essentially free. So that's fine. It's just a relationship, and the more the better. And it's just being okay asking questions and asking for help. However, I keep on using AI. I remember when I did a talk in the States on the Boardroom of the Future back in 2018. This is before ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff had come out. And I was talking about how technology, especially AI, could eventually act like a scalable coach. Like we've already got now tools whereby this is wonderful one called Pi.ai, which is being trained on relationship-based data and psychs and stuff like that. And you can ask it questions about how do I approach this with my relationship or with my parenting? And it gives really empathetic, well-rounded responses. So imagine if that we became comfortable having well-trained technology supporting us in that. That's scalable. And then everybody raises their game to where they can get to. Not everybody can do it equally, of course.
You and I, and anyone that exists in the startup space, in the corporate space, and in a lot of the not-for-profit space, we navigate around a term that sounds pretty scary to lay people. And we sort of all understand what it means. But the moment you mention it, people's eyes sort of glaze over a lot of the time. So I want to ask you in the most simple and succinct way that you can you explain what the phrase fiduciary duty means?
Oh, your legal responsibilities.
To?
The company.
And the company is the shareholders?
No, that depends on which country you're in.
Okay.
So everyone's got their own version of the Corporations Act. That's a corporation, which is I will diverse and come back. Corporate governance scares people who don't work in big corporates because they think it doesn't apply to them. But corporate in this sense means any incorporated entity. So that means you've got a piece of paper that defines you, not-for-profit, charity, school, whatever institution, big company, small company, you're an incorporated entity.
So if we're going to define corporate, we also have to define governance.
Yeah.
So
get to that.
Okay.
Or we can do it now, but fiduciary duty on behalf of is your legal responsibilities on behalf of the company. Now, the Corporations Act in different countries, Commonwealth countries have similar ones where the company is defined by its stakeholders. In the US, though, it tends to be defined as its owners. So you've got a difference between stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism. So it depends on how you define the company and who has a stake in that company. And again, it doesn't have to be a stake in terms of a financial stake. It can be the impact of the decisions. That's hence why stakeholders there's internal ones like your staff, your owners and stuff, and there's external ones, which is your customers and your employees, your suppliers, up and down the supply chain, regulators. The environment is essentially a stakeholder.
Yep.
So your fiduciary responsibilities are your responsibilities, your legal responsibilities for the company on behalf of whatever's defined. I personally think it should be all stakeholders, and then you've got to decide how you rank them.
Traditional interpretations of fiduciary duty prioritize short-term financial returns over long-term impact. What does that mean for the planet and our society?
Bad things. We wouldn't be in this mess. We wouldn't be having this conversation if things had been defined in the long term, not short term.
We often talk about how business is a great lever for change. I think one of the things we don't so quickly or succinctly summarize is that business has got us into much of the mess that we're in today.
Yes. Has it been business, or has it been the system that businesses operate within?
Obviously, that goes to complexities and capitalism.
But where did the system come from? Did it come from the first businesses that created it because they were looking to exploit or create or whatever it happened to be? So it's like chicken and egg situation, which we could spend hours diving into what happened first. Yeah, like I think you and I both agree that we have fundamental systemic issues. It's incentives, short-termism versus long-termism. COVID brought short-termism right to the forefront. And really, everything was about fighting fires. And I think in the board context, we haven't really got past that yet because it's so complex now. There's so much going on. There's also the fallout from all of that. It's fighting fires. Like, I can understand. I can empathize with boards that struggle to get beyond the short term. And it's not just financial results, like our CEO's resigning, or our CEO's not performing, or we've lost that funder, or whatever it happens to be. We're in a loss-making situation, or that partnership's ended. Everything's short term. Now, technically, that should be being managed by the management team, and the board oversee that, and then are really focused on the long term, especially the risks, like what else could come.
Yep.
What else could be coming? That's where they can bring the experience to bear. Is like, here's our strategy. What could stop us or slow us down or divert our attention? That's where the board skill comes back. But it's so easy to just go, look, numbers, what should we do? Ask questions, prod the management team, create solutions.
Do you think, in a sense, boards hide behind fiduciary duty as an excuse to not make those harder or more progressive decisions?
Yeah, but again, it's an interpretation of what really fiduciary duty is, your responsibility towards the company. There's no hiding behind that because it should be long term as well as short term. But it's easy for us to just do something which is right there in front of us. As I said, I go back to the whole point, like most people can't think that far ahead. They might go, you know what, yeah, I'd love to own my own house in 10, 20 years time or something like that. Yeah, I'm young, kids are on the horizon, but it's not really being visionary. It's just following a path that most people have already trod before.
You mentioned before about the environment being a stakeholder to business and to many people, especially in the spaces that we operate in.
Yeah.
I work very heavily in the regenerative economic space, business for good, social enterprise. That's not a new concept to me. My question is, how do we expand the definition of what's in a stakeholder's best interests so that not killing their planet over the next century ranks as high, if not higher, than paying them a good dividend next quarter?
I don't know, Kane. I really don't know. Political will, a disaster, more disasters. The problem with climate change, it's an environmental impact, it's creeping death. It's not right in our face like a tsunami is, and we all jump to help. when something like that happens, but it's creeping up on us, and there's enough people with vested interest to keep us in the dark or to divert our attention or say it's naturally occurring or whatever it happens to be. So I think I really wish I had an answer. Like, for me, this is why I focus on the boardroom, because there's individuals within there, and it's really a case of educating, and then bringing the awareness to the fact that they have to think long term. Okay, if we're going climate change is real, then we have to start making long term decisions. The problem is they're beholden to a short term societal need for quick headline grabbing information. To think long term.
There's a bit of a discussion in society at the moment around, in some jurisdictions, around reducing the voting age, for example, to 16. And the premise of that is really simple. It's that younger people have longer to spend here.
Also, if they're going to be in prison from the age of 10, then the least we can do is give them a right to have shape the laws that are affecting them.
Well, if the law determines that a human knows the difference between right and wrong at age 10, so
I am very much on that page. And I would actually say the opposite, that I know some 16-year-olds that should be voting when some 60-year-olds shouldn't.
I've made the argument that if we, in Australia, our constitution dictates that judges must retire at a certain age, that indicates and formalises that neurological decline exists.
Okay, I'm going to take it to another level. Maybe, like we talked about, there's some sort of entry to become a board director. So in some countries around the world, you cannot become a board director unless you have a qualification in governance. Pakistan's one of those countries, I believe, still. But they don't have many boards. They don't have this huge array of companies and boards, right? And everything's like an appointment, a formal appointment. So it's easier to do. What if, from a voting perspective, you couldn't vote unless you passed some sort of, not say intelligence test, because obviously you have to make sure those are inclusive, but something that means you understand what you're actually doing. Like, I remember when Vote Compass was out, and you would answer a whole bunch of questions about different policies and stuff, and it would say, this is how you should vote based on your responses. You don't have to do that way, but you did. So there's a barrier between just going, you know what, I've always voted this party, I'll just keep doing it. Or I don't know, I haven't got a clue what the policies are, but he's nice.
Yeah, and increasingly in this age of disinformation, more people are throwing their hands up when they vote and go, oh, I don't know, so I'll pick that guy or that woman.
Yeah. And in this country, we have to vote, so we don't have a choice, which is good in one way, but dangerous in another way, because you have more ignorance, but you have more people involved. My home country, you don't have to vote, so it's a choice. But then that means you have a whole bunch of disenfranchised people.
Bringing it back to age, in the context of a younger person has longer to spend traditionally on Earth than an older person, and as such they are more affected by decisions we make for the future.
So we should weight their vote. A younger person gets more votes for their vote because they have more vested interest in the long term. I like that idea.
I think certainly, I think straight to my father, who would argue that, well, my lived experience is not, worth any less than yours just because you're young. Maybe it should be on policies that relate to the future, long-term planning.
Well, this is where technology is another game changer for us if we embrace it. Like right now, you walk into a booth, you do your pen and you put it in the slot, and that's everywhere. But if we could just convert everything into an online place where you answer a whole bunch of questions, here's what affects me, here's what I care about, your vote could be apportioned up relatively.
I'm a big fan of enacting a partial direct democracy, which technology allows us to do. Maslow has some pretty ambitious goals towards that end, but they're my pie in the sky sort of things, and to use the way we all use the financial system as a way to influence change for the collective.
Yeah. The ones who are usually against using technology from a voting perspective are usually the ones who fear what that would mean.
Absolutely, of course. If we look at the average age of the boardroom being late 50s, early 60s, you have a very animated vision of young directors bringing colour to a grey boardroom. Yeah. It's pretty powerful. What do we need to do to make that happen? How do we get younger people at the boardroom table?
Well, again, if I think about it from I'm an economist by education, so I think about things in supply and demand. So from the supply side, we need more young people. And when I say young, that's people in their, not just like teenage years and 20s. It's like anybody under the age of 50 is bored young. So 30s, 40s, going, I can get into the boardroom. It is possible. And there are plenty of people out there doing this. So they need more people getting interested in the world of corporate governance, organizational governance, and really understanding what it is. Doesn't mean going off and spending thousands of dollars on education. It's just getting interested in that this is something that you can do. In fact, you're sort of doing it now already. You're already involved in governance because you're making decisions at some level, and you can get involved, and this is what the implications are of getting involved, and this is what can happen if you do get involved. So there's a supply side of like more people knocking on the door going, let me in. On the demand side, it's something we've talked about beforehand. It's boards going, we need something different for this world. We need people who represent a far more distant future than we do, who come in with different ideas, who've been brought up in a digital age, who have different values set to us. We just need that, because our duty, fiduciary duty, is not on behalf of us and what we're getting out of it. It's on behalf of the company and technically in perpetuity, so the long term. So we should be doing all the things to make sure we are the most effective decision-making unit possible, which could be getting out the way. But then you've got all these human conditions that get in the way of that. So the supply side is easy. Start knocking on the door, get mentors, start talking to people, find other people who've done it before and learn from them. Read my freaking book. The demand side is just like shift your mindset that you have to have had years of experience in order to be valuable in the boardroom. You do not.
Speaking of getting out of the way, one of your, I was going to say controversial, but perhaps it is simply uncomfortable for some people, positions, is that you said the more senior people are on paper, often the less they know about what they're doing.
Yeah, I do position myself as a bit of a provocateur.
Yeah.
It tends to be more that people get set in their ways.
Yep.
And so there's a confirmation bias. Going back to the villains of decision making, the more life you've had, the more bias you're going to have because you've got more filters. I think you may have heard this analogy before, that the older you get, the more experience you get, the more glasses get put on you. So you filter colored glasses, you filter everything that comes to you, all the inputs. This is just a visual input through these glasses. What work on yourself, that self-awareness does, is try to remove those so you're not filtering everything. So there's also this overconfidence that comes from having been around and been there, done that, and says, well, therefore I know more than someone who has nothing. But there's also this wisdom from an experience of going, I've got nothing in my way that's saying it's not possible, or we've always done it this way. This is the only way this works. Younger people generally will be, they're a blank slate. They've got, depending on how they've been brought up and taught and all that sort of side of things, private school education, who knows? Just using that because you said you had that one. They might be going like, anything's possible. Everything's possible. Because I've seen it happen in my lifetime already. Lots of things happen. I'm not saying they're right, but I'm not saying theirs right. It's like these groups coming together and having a discussion, and then from that, learning from each other, learning from experience, learning from the wisdom of inexperience, and having an open mind to everything, coming together, having a great discussion. Now, I'm not saying a group of 60-year-old white men can't make great decisions. If they've all got the right mindset and they're bringing in all that information and they're having an open mind, they're self-aware, they're high EQ and all that sort of side of things, it's just highly unlikely.
Part of me wants to trivialize the concept of having younger and older board members sitting at the same table. And I think to those exceptional programs that exist in retirement villages where schools take young children along to spend time with elderly people. And I know I'm trivializing and I'm sensationalizing it as an example. But both parties get so much out of that.
That's the bit. It's like, here's the sad grey life coming to a close. Here's this young, vibrant, energetic people, bring colour. So where you got that from was, I always had this advert where you walk into the boardroom on the top of this tower, and again, where the boardroom sits within there. I've always asked this question, it's like, everybody goes, it's at the top. Why should it be the top? You go in there and it's grey, and there's a whole bunch of grey people having grey conversations, and then you zoom round to these young people, it's a cartoon, young people there, and they're curious, they're asking questions. Like kids ask, why? They're just the same thing. Why are we doing it this way? Why have we thought about this? And it spreads, but it only spreads if everybody's listening. And I think it's a great analogy. It's not trivializing. I think it's wonderful. It sparks something new, even if it's temporary. But you have to be ready to accept and acknowledge and welcome it in. And this is what the problem with boards are. It's like, it could be fear. Like, I know where it comes from for many people. Often if you're, I'm putting old over here, this age group, your kids, grown up or otherwise, are the same age as the people who are knocking on the door and bring in. And as a parent myself, like, yes, my kid is 11, I can understand and empathize that doesn't matter how old they are, you'll always see your kids as kids. Doesn't matter what role they have, how smart they are, you still see them as kids, and therefore you there to protect them. They don't know everything they need. They need to be guided, and again, stereotyping. So you can understand why a lot of people looking at that and say, you're the same as my kids. I wouldn't trust my kid to be in this board. So why should I trust you? You haven't had all that life experience. Plus, there's also that element of, well, I had to do all this to get to where I am. It should be the same for you.
Yeah.
And I hate that.
To be here because you haven't...
Again, it's not an entitlement.
No.
And like, there's not a whole bunch of young people going, oh, I deserve a board.
No, it's about
some.
It's about perspective.
Yeah, it's like I've got something to contribute. And it's not decades of experience. That's not what I'm here to give. So we have to measure what it means to be a great board director. And it's not like we just need a whole bunch of young people in the boardroom. It's like, let's have a blend of all of it.
While you've been talking, I've been sitting here thinking about another analogy, as I often do. I'm a fan of analogies. Anyone that's ever read anything I've written will know that. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're very much not, but I like them nonetheless. I keep coming back to this notion that maybe we should look at a board as a mini community, right? And I say that in the context of I'm a part of the queer community, and I think if you are queer, you are a part of it, whether you are actively engaged with it or not. We're all part of some type or some kind of, let's say, a niche community within the larger community we're a part of. You know, if you wanted to be, you're part of the British expat community. You could be part of that. You could be part of any other type of community.
I'm part of a governance geek community.
Absolutely, and I wasn't going to say it, but I'm glad you did. But if I think about one of the things that exists within the queer community, and I have to disclaim this by saying, you know, I'm a white man, so I see the queer community very differently to a lot of people, and I have an enormous amount of privilege. But one of the things that older members of the gay community often lament is that younger members of the gay community don't listen to their stories. And, you know, the gay culture is very much a one of, and I mean, our entire society is a one of young and pretty. Young and pretty is best. And, you know, that's hardwired into humans, but it's also in our social constructs. And so we have members of the same community who each benefit if that community is strong and well-informed and diverse, not talking to each other on each side of that spectrum. And you have that missing link. And in almost every single case study where younger members of that community are placed with older members of that community for a conversation, both come away feeling like they know more than when they went in. Maybe we need to look at boards as a community.
Yeah, and what's underlying all of that? Curiosity. And it has to be two-way. So you might have the older members of that community going, no one wants to listen to my stories. And you've got maybe the younger people going, they don't want to listen to us and what we want and what we need. It's just a case of like, curiosity brings those two groups together. I want to hear from you and you want to hear from me. Wouldn't that be great?
I think
the problem is what you find is that younger people go, you've fucked it up, therefore why would I listen to you? And older people can go, why am I going to listen to you? You've had no life experience. So we create these barriers that aren't really there.
It speaks to, I think, our propensity as humans to dehumanize the people we don't want to side with.
Yeah.
Reminds me, one of my favorite quotes was Abraham Lincoln. And it was a quote of its time. And it was, I don't much like that man. I best get to know him. And I think that has a place in the boardroom and in diversity.
Absolutely.
And understanding perspectives, spending time with people. I know that there's a really strong presence within the first Indigenous Australian community of this notion of sit with me and share your story. Tell me your story. Hear my story. And I think maybe there's an opportunity to bring that perspective into a boardroom.
Absolutely. There's so many different things that boards can do, reviewing the health of the board and working with the board. Often they don't spend any time getting to know one another. They want to, but there's no time allocated to it.
No, we've got 2 hours a quarter.
Yeah, we've got 2 hours a quarter. We're all virtual. When have we got time to learn about each other, let alone learn about ourselves? And so there's little ways you can do that. Yes, you can do like off-sites and things, but if you don't have the budget for that, you can allocate some time. My favorite thing is an activity called a check-in, where it's a psychological way of making sure everybody's present, but also sharing their emotions in any form. It can be safe or more open depending on the group, and just sharing where they're at. And if you do that,
is that a bit like tell me what's going on in your life right now?
No, it can be like what there's this whole thing from a neuroscience perspective around masking, and if we mask our emotions, it can actually impact our cognitive ability by like I think up to 60%. So you imagine you've got a whole bunch of people coming into the room in the boardroom making billion-dollar decisions. Doesn't matter what the number is, making decisions that impact this organization, this company, and all of its stakeholders, but they're masking their emotions. They could be distracted, they could be hangry, they could be pissed off at something that happened just before them, but everybody's there. What check-ins can do is actually allow you to articulate something and take the mask away. And that just raises everybody's cognitive level. So if we can do that, that just helps you get to know each other. And also, if we get to know each other a bit better, you can then remove the filter about how you listen to someone. Like if you know that person's past or what's going on in their life, there's a little bit more empathy.
So it's potentially, I crashed my car on the way to this meeting, so I'm not thinking about this meeting at all. I'm not listening. I'm not present.
If you didn't know that, if no one in the room knew that, and you didn't share that with them, you weren't given the space to share that, everything you hear, you probably won't hear most of it because you're still thinking about that. You could be in pain, so it's distracting. Plus, everything you say could be really reactive, quite aggressive.
Plus,
or you could be sad. I don't know.
Tabling how you feel and the mindset that you're in at any given time is a release a lot of the time. So it might help in making you more present in the first place.
Yeah, these check-in activities that a lot of sort of neuroscience-backed behavioral sort of consultants use with teams, this high-performing team, it's like, here's where I'm at. And again, it can be done in lots of different ways. You don't have to say, I'm feeling, it doesn't have, you don't get an emotion where I'm feeling this, I'm feeling this. It just helps remove the outside when you're coming into the room. The more that you can do that though, the more self-aware everybody comes, so they can transition from one to the other. Plus the empathy and the EQ, everything goes up in the room. And you get the iceberg effect where everything happens below like most of an iceberg's below the surface. In the boardroom is safe. It's all the stuff that goes unsaid, the thoughts, the feelings, the ideas. We need to bring more of that above the surface, and these are the ways to do it. Because essentially, I'll say one thing. Essentially, going back to that definition we haven't said of corporate governance, all it is people making decisions in companies, in corporations. So we should be doing everything possible to help boards or any other form of governing group make better decisions. So it's another input into that.
I try to play devil's advocate in these interviews because sometimes there are listeners who don't agree and they don't get to say anything. They don't get to rebut you. They don't get to challenge you. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask, as a teenager, as someone in his early 20s, were you a rebellious person?
No.
Not at all?
No.
So no one could say that this is just your way of continuing a rebellion. I've heard you say that you don't ever want to grow up.
Yeah, that's changed now to more... the words I use now is like, say, with my relationship, I don't want to grow old together. I want to stay young together. And it's more an attitude and a mindset. It's more me saying, I want to stay curious and fun and spontaneous and not set in my ways.
Which speaks to what you think is lacking in the boardroom at the moment.
So, no, I was never a rebel. I was a goody two-shoes. My nickname, more embarrassing stuff they didn't share, like my nicknames at school were Paul Perfect, Captain Sensible. I wasn't a risk taker. I know sort of one of the reasons why that is. I fell in a lake when I was very young, almost drowned, and I stopped taking risks from then on. Yeah. So I've only come to risk-taking and being out there in a later life. And I think, I don't know where it comes, I think this, going back, I do know where it comes from. It's still that sense of social justice. So I'm rebelling. The only thing I'm rebelling against was a sense of feeling misunderstood and gaslit, which I only got access to later on in life. But looking back and reflecting. So I was never a rebel at the time at all. I put myself out there sometimes, and I was pushed back down again, saying, back in your place.
So I've got 3 more questions that are deep.
Yeah.
And then I've got a light-hearted one, and then one to finish off and we're done.
There was supposed to be something about my commercial journey as well. Like, is that, we're not covering that? I don't mind at all. This is your interview, but that was in the brief.
Yeah, we probably could have covered it earlier on with the process to getting to future directors. Do you want to cover it?
I don't mind at all.
I think there's enough in what we've said to sort of understand.
Basically, my story is in the shorthand. I've been a paper millionaire twice, and I'm essentially broke, almost broke right now. But I don't really care. But I do.
All right, that's. I'm going to cover that, and you're going to answer. You're going to weave that into the answer.
Okay.
And it's something that's personal. story. It's a personal, I guess, focus of mine. And I like to speak to people who are working in what I consider social impact. So you've written about sinking personal money into keeping your dreams alive, having panic attacks, struggling to pay rent. Most people don't talk about these aspects of trying to drive change. Why do you think that is? And what made you decide to be more open about it?
One of my strengths is my ability to share my thoughts and feelings quite openly. I have no problems. I don't feel like I'm ever needing to prove anything to anybody, mostly to myself, if anything, but not to other people. So I have no problems sharing that. And I also think it provides permission for others to do the same. Like, when I do posts like that on LinkedIn, where I show vulnerability, I get more traction than anything else because people go, thank you, I'm feeling the same, messages of thanks, and I wish I could do that. And it just helps me feel like I'm not alone. So one part of that question is, for a long time now, I have had fewer and fewer. Am I allowed to swear? I know swear.
Absolutely.
I give less and less fucks about what other people think, and because I'm only really talking to the people who want to listen and feel that. And if people judge me based on that stuff, up to them. So I'm happy to share that stuff. And I've had lots of ups and downs. You know, I've been on paper millionaire twice, lost it all because I lost my job, lost it all because of variations in valuations and stuff. And I've had divorce. I've had a divorce where I've lost money. I lost most of my money. So on paper I have assets, but nothing that could liquidate right now. And I'm living month to month. I get paid very well for what I do. I just don't get paid enough of the time. And I'm also owed a ton of money by one foreign client who is ghosting me, but that's another story. So I'm not that commercial. I'm great at ideas, and I was pretty commercial when I was running a team at a company and did really well, but I had the support around me that took my ideas and put it into action. I've struggled to really commercialize that stuff because I often get distracted with new ideas, but I still have got to the point whereby, you know, a organization in Texas will pay me and fly me over and pay me $10,000 for 45 minutes of my time, which is wonderful, but that doesn't happen enough. Now, another part of your question was why don't other people share those journeys? I think because if you're running something or you are an owner of something and you're founder of something, there's this element of we have to have it all together, because if people are backing us, they don't want to back someone who doesn't have it all together, even though no one has it all together. Yeah. It's like this lie that's perpetuating, saying everybody knows deep down that we've all got our problems, and yet no one's allowed to talk about it. I love analogies as well. So I give you an analogy, and it goes back to the community idea, right? I used to work in superannuation in this country, so pension funds for any of you overseas listeners, like big pension fund industry we have in this country. And one of the biggest problems was superannuation funds, their entire focus is long-term because the people they're doing it for is their retirement. Yep. And the average member's in their 40s and 50s, whatever. And so they're like decades away.
And that's mandated in Australia.
And it's mandated.
Yeah.
So they're mandated to think about the long term. And then you've got all these superannuation funds invest in companies. And of course they're investing in these companies for the long term, because they want long-term things. They want long-term returns. And superannuation funds are probably one of the largest block of investors in this country. And pension funds around the world tend to be like a high percentage of on the shareholder register of any listed company. And then we go back to that short-termism. Like, super funds shouldn't really care about ridiculous short-term returns. Companies seem to. Governments definitely do. If you're not performing, you've got all these freaking league tables now. Oh my God, the last 12 months, you didn't that well. Who cares about 12 months of return when your actual portfolio is not going to come to fruition for 20 years? So you've got these two sides that if they just sat down and went, hold on, we're the biggest block of investors, we're the companies you're investing in, shouldn't we all be just thinking long term because that's what we really care about? Anybody in between there, like retail investors, even those ones, like are they really in and out for like short-term games? No, that's hedge funds and opportunistic investors, brokers, all the people we don't really care about. But they're the ones who are taking advantage of the fact that groups don't talk to each other. So maybe the solution to all of this is not just curiosity, it's listening. It's just like, let's just sit down and talk to each other. I think almost everything could be solved that way. I'm going off on a tangent here, but I truly believe most of the problems in this world are caused by how we treat each other as humans. Therefore, the solution's the same.
You've sacrificed a lot for your mission and your beliefs.
Yeah.
Last year, I spoke with the founder of Seabin, Pete Seglinski, who is obsessed with cleaning up the world's oceans. When I asked him about the toll that his obsessive mission has taken on his life, he cried. and he didn't expect to. And then he told me that it had cost him the relationship with his partner and impacted the relationship he had with his kids. It had cost him his health, driven him to drink and to isolate himself to the point where he just had nothing left. And yet he kept fighting. Why do you keep fighting?
Because if I do, nobody else will, right? I have had none of those problems based on my obsession. Yes, it did impact my marriage, my former marriage, but that was just a thing that I think it probably impacted it badly, but in the end it was a good thing because it helped me become the person I am today. But nothing like that, none of it has driven me. It's really the biggest impact for me has been financial. Okay, if I spend the last 10 years in corporate world, I'd have lots of money, hopefully, but I wouldn't probably be liking what I do. Maybe I would, but there's no point. There's no sliding door stuff. What keeps me going is, and this is really interesting because at the beginning of this year, I almost gave up what I was doing. And it was only a trip to the States where I go every year to talk at a conference where I had these amazing meetings and I did some talks which were, again, pretty out there because that's what they liked from me. And the response was phenomenal. And I just realized people are still listening. There's still people out there who want things to change. And if I stop, I'm not the only one, but I'm one of few who are really pushing the boundaries in the corporate governance space. If I stop, then there's no one that takes away another voice, which is an advocate for change. And I go and do something which is safer or more financially sensible, whatever happens to be like that. So I'm driven because people are still responding and saying, yes, I agree, please say more. So that's what keeps driving me forward. And all I've got to do is make sure I can keep the lights on.
What's it like to sit and drink whiskey with Jane Goodall?
It's pretty freaking phenomenal when you reflect back on it. It's normal now. And it's a mix of having a drink with your grandma and a grumpy old woman, depending on what time of day you get her, but also hearing stories that blow your mind, like people she's met, conversations she's had or having, and you just sit there going, I'm sitting in a hotel room with Jane Goodall, just talking to her like we're mates, which we are, and suddenly she zones out or she says something grumpy about like something in the kitchen, and then she's telling a story about when she was sat down with the half the royal family in Saudi Arabia, like the week before, or something like that. It's a bit of a mind fuck, to be honest.
For those who don't know, I just want to explain that Jane Goodall is a world-renowned primatologist, UN Messenger of Peace, and the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees. Her study of which revolutionized our understanding of both primate and human evolution. And she later founded the Jane Goodall Institute and has become one of the world's most prominent environmentalists and advocates for conservation, animal welfare and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, and she's the one with the grey hair, not the dark-haired one. That's Diane Fossey. She did gorillas. They all get mixed up. Jane's now 90. She turns 91 this year, and she still travels 300 days of the year. She's not very well known in this country still, although more so. She is celebrity status in most parts of the world. She's from the UK, but the US, they know her well. She packs out stadiums like a rock star.
I was really excited to come across this question in the research for today. I sort of summarize it or tie it to what Eleanor Roosevelt used to do in her parlor, and that was to bring intellectuals, creatives, artists, sex workers into a place with no agenda, provide them a little bit of lubricant in alcoholic form, probably others, and talk about ideas, about problems, about perspectives. And I haven't told this story publicly before, but one of my fondest experiences was actually sitting and drinking whiskey with Barry Humphries.
Oh, really?
And hear some parts of his story. And I am about to embark on a trip to the US and the UK, and I'm reaching out to some very prominent people and people who are at the coalface of challenge when it comes to change. People of colour fighting against colonialisation and systemic injustices. People who every day face enormous challenges. And you reach out to these people. You say, hey, I'm coming to your city, whether it's Toronto, whether it's Denver, whether it's whatever. I would like to sit with you and spend time. And it's a really interesting response because not many people actually say, hey, I want to sit with you and talk. We get the LinkedIn messages, hey, have you got time for a coffee? And there's an angle to be played there, but we very rarely get, hey, I want to sit with you and I want to learn from you. And there are a couple of people I'm trying to meet on my trip, and Lewis Bird is one of them, and he works in innovation architecture in the States. And I reached out to him and said, I'm over there, I'm near where you are, I'd like to meet you. To his credit, I didn't give him any context. I didn't say why. Sometimes I assume people know. And I said to him,
surely you've read everything about me.
He came back to me, as he should have, quite skeptical. It was like, okay, but why? And I was like, oh, sorry. look, I want to tap into your network, and I'm coming for funding. I want to get it. I want to raise funds, but to raise funds, you have to have access, and access is about conversation and connecting with people.
Relationships.
And so there are a couple of people that I would really like to spend time with. And he said, oh, what would you like to get out of it? And I said, look, if I potentially make a friend out of a stranger on the internet, then it will be a success.
Nice.
And I think those opportunities are really nice.
How did he respond to that?
He said, what did he say? Hang on, I'll read it to you. He said, and I was thrilled because I should have explained up front. He applauded what I said and he said, let's make it happen.
See, you could have easily got a response to saying, no, I don't have time. But honesty, intention, you said what your goal was, but you weren't saying, I'm coming to you for funding.
I think 50 years ago, when we weren't as healthy as we are and health conscious as we are today, it would have been, I would like to sit with you and drink whiskey.
Yeah. Doesn't mean you can't.
No.
Going back to what you said about those sort of conversations and mixing those people up, I remember a story. I was doing a piece of work for an Indigenous corporation up in northern WA, and we used a check-in which a lot of people within the Black community use in Australia, which is, where do you feel most at home? And we're going round, and we're talking, mostly people from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander background, and there was one sort of Westerner. And it was like on country, with mob, family, bang, 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 bang. And then the Westerner, Irish Australian, said, back home in Australia with my family. So it was placing people. Interesting, even though I asked the question because I was facilitating this session, I didn't actually know what my answer was going to be.
That's my next question.
But my answer was similar to the Eleanor Roosevelt. My sense of home, i.e. belonging, is in rooms like this with people like you doing what we're doing. So, my never-to-be-written memoirs will be called Search for Home, because I've spent my entire life trying to find belonging, and I did a lot of fitting in. I know Brené Brown talks about fitting in versus belonging is a big difference. One is authentic, and the other bit is you mold yourself to a group. I was a social butterfly at university. I was trying to belong to everyone, and I belonged to no one at the same time. And I've realized through my story that my sense of belonging or home is usually with like-minded people talking about ideas, that sort of side of things. It's not going out and getting pissed with the lads unless we're having amazing conversations, right? And sometimes that happens because of the lubricant. But I love, this is what I think draws me to high-performing boardrooms, is you can have some phenomenal conversations there with diverse people that wouldn't normally meet each other. And that really, I love that.
I have an absolute thirst for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell a relatively new story.
That's why I love the podcast format.
Thanks.
As well. Sorry, that was the last.
I was extremely fortunate yesterday morning to meet Peter Singer.
Nice.
I've been trying to meet Peter Singer for about 5 years. I'm a huge fan of his work. And yesterday I got to speak with him for an hour to talk about ideas and to talk about what we were building. He started the conversation as a skeptic, and I was given an incredible opportunity to challenge him and draw out ideas, and he did the same in return. And after the call, I messaged a friend of mine who has worked with Peter before, and her name's Chris Parker, and Chris Parker runs the Ethics Alliance. And she asked how it went, and I told her how I thought it went. And I said to her, you know how Eleanor Roosevelt had those parlors for intellectuals that came together without agenda to ideate and ruminate and think and dream and talk and grow? I wish we had something like that. I'm not much a fantasy football kind of guy, but I'd definitely put you and Peter on my fantasy parlor team. And I think maybe more of us need to have a fantasy parlor team.
Yeah, it's great. Well, why shouldn't we just have parlors? Why have fancy ones? Why do it has to be a fantasy? Why can't it be a reality? I know Chris relatively well, and yeah, I can see why you want her on the list. She's also really fun.
I have a lot of time for Chris.
Yeah,
Chris is
last time I saw her was a few years ago at South Star in Adelaide, and so much fun.
If I talk about some of the more difficult decisions I've made in business, there was one late last year that Chris was instrumental in assisting with, and is always there to pick up the phone and talk me through something.
One of the conversations, because she also helped set up the banking finance oath, and I was speaking to her again a couple of years ago when I was looking at ideas about having a board director oath, and essentially we're signing a similar thing to say a pledge in terms of your behavior and your, I suppose, fiduciary duties and stuff like that. And I still think it's a great idea because millions of board directors around the world who could basically pledge to behave in a certain way, to act in a certain way, to help make decisions in a certain way. It's just a statement of intent that we just don't have. Like when you're appointed to a board, you sign a piece of paper, and yes, you're beholden to the rules and the regulations, but none of those rules and regulations really talk about your behavior as an individual. And from an ethical perspective, and I think I would love to pick that back up with Chris if I had the time.
I'll let her know.
I should let her know.
Yeah. I finish every interview with the same question. If you could change one thing, just one thing, in the context of your work that you think would improve the world the most, what would it be?
Oh, Jesus.
That's generally the first response.
What, Jesus?
Oh, Jesus, that's a big question.
It's a good question. One thing in the context of my work.
The question used to be, if you could change one thing in the world to make the world better, what would it be? But we speak to experts, so we want to refine it in the context of your work.
So is it something I can change or just something?
However you
I'm so curious about this question.
Yeah, however you interpret the question.
Okay.
In the context of your work, it could be anything. It could be...
Okay, so I will take it away from my work and put it in the world I work in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think...
This is the only long pause we won't edit out of the podcast.
Okay. There's so many things I feel like if I say one thing, it's going to be the wrong thing because I've got a list of so many things. So I'm trying to pick the one which will have an impact.
You couldn't have been a fighter pilot. You labour on your decisions.
I know, it's too much. Not instantaneous decision and just like deal with it. Deal with the consequences. Usually I'm a say yes and deal with the consequences person, like Richard Branson says, right? Deal with it afterwards. Oh my God, I just don't want to pick something trite. I want to wave a magic wand over everybody's mindset. Okay, the one thing, let's go for it. Okay, and this goes back to the work I do with Matt Fulbrook. I know I mentioned him, but he's my governance friend, very close friend, is that I would like that boards had a universal deep understanding of what governance is and what good governance is, and that everyone agrees to it and everybody's acts on it. Because right now we don't have that. I know that sounds funny, but in this world we do not have a universal agreement of what corporate governance is and what good corporate governance is. There is no universal agreement on that. We have dictionary definitions, but some of them are, and we have definitions from different groups, institutes and stuff like that, but they don't conform to one thing, and some of them are absolute gobbledygook.
That brings us to the end of our chat today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anyone listening, particularly younger people who might not think they would have previously qualified or been the right person to sit on a board, if they want to get involved or start that learning journey, where can they find you or get more information?
Okay, so the two places for if you consider yourself an outsider, if that's young or you don't fit a particular mold in your mind. First thing I would do is you can follow me on LinkedIn. Future Paul Smith is the easy way to find me. Paul Smith is a common name, obviously. So just chuck the future in there. You should find me in Australia. Also, you can get hold of my book, Right Seat, Right Table, which is an outsider's guide to finding the ideal board role. So that's just a starter. It's a really practical guide. It's available online everywhere, Kindle, paperback, Amazon, all that sort of stuff. Those are the first places. Obviously, Future Directors doesn't really do that anymore. We've moved away from that space. So there's plenty of places out there who have now taken sort of what we started 10 years ago when we started Future Directors and we're all about young people on boards. Almost no one was talking about this. And now there's a lot more people talking about that stuff. So there's plenty of places out there supporting younger people into the boardroom. But I would just read up and look at case studies and reach out to people who are just a few years older than you who sit on boards. That's what LinkedIn's for. Search people who are, and look up and ask them, going back to what we were saying beforehand, I'm not sure which way this can be edited round, but ask them, can I come and have a talk with you and share stories and help guide me? That's what I would recommend they do. Find people who can guide them.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.